Good morning. This is Violet, and we're continuing our reading. Come read with me. We're going to read and continue our reading in Six of One, Half a Dozen the Other, my autobiography. And I hope you're enjoying it. It looks to me from all the responses that you are, and I'm so happy about that. My life was a whole lot different than what yours is today, but you know what? It's all good. This next chapter is called Bumps and Bruises. Each of us, in turn, had some sort of mild to moderate catastrophe or injury, but mostly we were healthy and relatively injury-free. Mine happened when I was 4 years old. Fresno, being an arid climate, supports many different kinds of hardy wild grasses. One of these, a sort of wild grain similar to rice or wheat, grows here naturally. We call this wild grass foxtails because of the seed head's resemblance to the bushy tail of a fox. The foxtails are great fun to play with, but when dry, break apart and get into clothing, socks, hair, and dog's ears. They have tiny microscopic burrs on them which are designed to drive them into the ground for propagating. These burrs are what make the green seed heads so fun. By breaking off the seed head and placing it between your open palms, with the point facing upward toward your body, you can make the foxtail crawl up your arms to your elbows simply by placing your arms together and moving them in a forward and backward motion. It provided us with hours of fun. It was one of those foxtails that caused my calamity. Summertime is very hot in the valley, often with temperatures rising above 105 degrees. In the spring, the foxtails are green. But as the weather warms, the grass heads dry out. The dry foxtails had fallen into segments and were scattered throughout the yard. Somehow, while playing in the dirt, one of the segments lodged itself in the outer corner of my eye. The tiny burrs that are designed to assist in replanting itself drove it deep into my eye socket. Although it must have caused me great irritation, I said nothing to Mama about it. She was unaware that the thing was there until I began to sleep all the time. She recognized that this was abnormal and took me to see the doctor. After the examination revealed all else was normal, he checked my eyes and discovered the culprit. He turned my eyelid inside out, and the foxtail segment dislodged itself. Fortunately, I suffered no permanent damage from it. Attending public school exposed us to other minor ailments and nuisances like impetigo and head lice. At least once we were all exposed to lice, and it required diligence on the part of our mother to rid us of those pests. She refused to cut our long hair, so she greased our heads well with shortening and painstakingly stripped the nits from our hair, one child at a time. I was a thumbsucker. Playing outside in the dirt and thumbsucking were a bad combination. I once had a very bad case of pinworms. Several of us had impetigo, and one year it was very hard to get rid of. It is quite contagious and unfortunately thrived in an environment of uncleanliness. We were often dirty because we spent most of our playtime outside in the dirt. The sores would grow in the moist folds of our elbows or knees. It was treated with a liquid medicine the color of dark violet. It had to be painted onto the infectious sores and left until they healed, and the danger of spreading was past. After the sores healed, they often left behind telltale scars. I received a couple of other scars on my head that remain to testify of my minor mishaps. The first happened when I was about 7 years old. Since our family did not always have the adequate bedrooms, we sometimes had to make do with other circumstances. We lived in one house which had a large porch across the front of the house with screens instead of windows. Since it was summertime, the porch made an adequate bedroom for us girls. One evening, when it came time for me to go to bed, I did not want to go out the door and around the side of the house to reach the porch alone. It was dark, and I was afraid to go outside. There was a window between the living room and the porch, and I decided that I would crawl through, which would spare me from having to go out into the darkness. What I had not counted on, though, was that the floor of the porch was several inches lower then the floor inside the house. When I climbed feet first through the open window and stepped down onto the porch side, the floor was not where I expected it would be. The rest of my body flew backward and hit the floor with a thump. I crashed onto a metal toy pistol, which opened a great bleeding gash on the back of my head. When I put my hand to my head and saw the blood, I went tearing out the door, down the steps, around the house, and into the living room without giving a second thought to the darkness outside that had been my concern a few minutes earlier. After shaving the spot, cleaning and bandaging the cut, Mama once again sent me off to bed. I think that cured my fear of the dark. The scar on the front of my head was a little more exciting in its happening. Mama was gone to town to do the grocery shopping, and as she was her custom, she left the oldest child in charge, who at the time happened to be Fonda. The book of Proverbs says, "A little child left to himself will cause his mother shame." Well, I do not know that we caused her much shame, but we certainly caused her a lot of grief. We took advantage of our opportunity to play while the cat was away, quote, so to speak. The Frisbee had yet to be invented, but we were far ahead of the game. Paper plates, pie pans, and records all made good substitutes. Fonda was a teenager, and Joyce may have been also. We were all in the living room, tossing a paper plate back and forth between us. Then someone got the bright idea to play keep away. Since I was the youngest of the three, they were keeping the paper plate away from me. Back and forth it sailed above my head, out of reach. Then Joyce missed it, the plate hit the floor, and I made a dive for it. I had it just in my grasp when I felt a shove from behind. Joyce grabbed the paper Frisbee, and I went flying, head first, through one of the glass panes in our front door. Fortunately, I only suffered a small triangular cut of about a half-inch long on my forehead. It was another time that my guardian angel was there protecting me. I shudder to think what could have been. Although each of us had our mishaps, the odd thing was the often peculiar reaction of our mother when one of these injuries occurred while she was away. We obtained no sympathy, but more than likely a severe tongue lashing and maybe a lashing of another kind. Whenever Mama went to shop, she always left instructions for jobs to be completed before her return. I am certain it was an attempt to keep us so busy we couldn't possibly get into trouble while she was absent. But folly is bound up in the heart of children. Another Bible quote there. For instance, the time that Christine and Dorothy were left in charge. They were only a year apart, and there were only 4 children left at home by then. Christine was 15 and Dorothy 14 years old. Mama had once again gone grocery shopping and left instructions for the girls to cook the chicken for dinner. Instead, thinking they had plenty of time, they headed down the road to the cow pasture to have some fun. They were living on a dairy in Salinas then. The object of their pursuit was a large wooden cattle loading chute. It was, in essence, a large ramp used to move the cattle from the pasture to the transport truck. The chute was constructed with a board floor that had rails on either side to contain the cattle while sending them up the ramp and into the open truck. The top of the ramp, when no truck was backed up to it, ended into nothingness. The enterprising girls had discovered that by placing a long plank on top of the ramp, balancing it in the middle, with one end above the ramp side and the other out into space, they could make a terrific teeter-totter. They were having a super time riding up and down. Christine was pushing off at their feet on the planks of the ramp below her, while Dorothy was flying free on the open side. Eileen was standing close at hand, near the base of the structure, awaiting her turn. Suddenly, the plank swung sideways and stuck fast between 2 boards on the side rails. This had probably happened many times before, and there was only a slight hesitation before Christine simply grabbed onto one of the top rails and pushed sideways to dislodge the plank. It came loose quickly and hit the side of the chute, centered again, and off they went once more. Christine had felt the jar in her foot when the plank hit the other side, but she felt no pain, so she did not realize that she had been injured. Eileen, standing behind her, said, "Christine, you're bleeding." Christine, thinking that Eileen was just saying that to expedite her turn, said, "Uh-uh," and continued to seesaw. Eileen instead insisted that she really was bleeding, and Christine finally looked down to find her heel pinched and oozing blood. The girls quickly got down and walked back to the house about a tenth of a mile. Dorothy called a friend's house where they knew Mama was stopping on her shopping rounds, while Christine, who was trying not to bleed out all over the house, put a plastic bag over her foot and placed a rubber band around the top. Then, realizing that this was going to require a trip to the doctor's, she went into the bathroom and shaved her legs. The whole time that transpired between the accident and the time Mama returned was maybe an hour or less. By the time Mama got home, the plastic bag was full of blood and the foot could no longer be seen. It's hard to imagine how anyone else might react upon entering the house and finding their daughter with her foot in a blood-filled plastic bag. Mama's reaction was one of action. She spanked them all soundly for being disobedient, and then she drove Christine to the emergency room. When they arrived at the hospital, the doctor, while sewing up her heel, asked Christine how she happened to tear her heel almost off. She was too embarrassed to tell them that she did it teeter-tottering. All she could do was giggle. He said, "It isn't funny, child. Tell me what happened." When she finally got the story out, the doctor just shook his head from side to side and walked away. Hospital stays were rare in our family, but they sometimes were necessary. Although we were in surprisingly good health, some of the children did have circumstances which caused an emergency room visit, and sometimes a short stay in the hospital. Because we were on public assistance, when a hospital visit was required, we had to go to the county hospital. The county hospital was an understaffed and inefficient system. It was more the norm rather than the exception to wait 5 or 6 hours to be seen. Mama often sat in her chair in the waiting room and slept while we waited to be treated. Christine contracted valley fever when she was about 9 years old. Valley fever is a disease that is caused from some microbial fungus found in the valley dust. It is characterized by pain in the joints and muscles and can settle in the lungs like pneumonia. It can sometimes cause death. Christine was very sick and the doctor placed her in the hospital for care. He ordered the whole family to the health department for testing. Frank and Dorothy also tested positive but showed no symptoms. It is a lifetime illness with no real cure and may resurface at any time. Gerald and Bert were the only others who required hospitalization. Bert had 5 surgeries to build his ear and consequently 5 hospital stays. Interestingly, like Daddy, he was 12 at the time and required skin grafts taken from his tummy and thigh. As he aged, the grafts grew hair. He tried shaving, but the hair, like facial hair, continued to grow. So he grew his hair long to cover the ear. We were all jealous of the attention he received, and the gifts he got while he was in the hospital. He would come home with coloring books and crayons, cars, or other little toys. We did not go to visit him. As children, we were not allowed in the rooms. Bert, like his father before him, became a little spoiled during the hospital stays. Gerald contracted strep throat when he was 7, and our parents, unaware that he was ill, did not get him treatment. The strep, which can precipitate rheumatic fever, developed into a severe kidney infection. He became very ill, swelled up, and was hospitalized for a couple of weeks. Dee, when she was about 3, fell downstairs with a knife and it stuck in her chest. Fortunately, it hit a rib and she was not seriously hurt. Later, there was the calf incident, which I've already mentioned. Frank was stepped on by a horse when he was 18 months old as he crawled under a fence. Our parents were standing there talking to our pastor who had come to visit for the day. They were looking at the horse over the fence. Some of the children, those of the pastors, and we were running through the barn. The barn had a wooden floor, and the noise that echoed off of the boards spooked the horse. The frightened horse reared and came down on Frank's shoulder, dangerously close to his head. It left a hoof print, but did not do any serious damage. Eileen had a bad case of measles when she was 6. She was running a very high fever, but did not break out in the rash. The fever raged on at 106 for a couple of days. That's pretty high. Finally, Mama gave her a cool bath, prayed for her, and the rash popped out and she started to recover. Rex had a serious bout of sickness when he was less than 2, and Fonda, like me, had a run-in with a glass door. She was chasing Joyce through the house. That was not an unusual occurrence. Joyce ran through the door, quickly closing it behind her. Fonda, reaching out to stop the door from closing, put her hand right through the glass. She cut her hand between her thumb and finger, which required stitches, and kept her from doing the dishes for quite a while. And back then they didn't have the kind of glass that crumbles when you break it. It was just a splinter. Randall scraped through relatively unscathed, except for being thrown from the horse, which caused no serious injury. Aside from the aforementioned incidents, we were very fortunate in having few accidents. Most of these, it seemed, occurred when we were left to ourselves. Randall thrived on teasing and tormenting the others. He seemed to be in his prime element when he could play a practical joke on someone. In high school, he took wood shop as one of his electives. One day he was working at home in the garage on his school project. Daddy enjoyed working with wood, and both of them were in the middle of a project. Randall, unknown to my father, had purchased a rubber finger that looked as if it had been severed. It was jagged, bloody, and gross. He was making some woodcuts at the table saw, and when the moment was just right, he threw the finger onto the table saw and let out a terrible scream. Daddy hurried over, pale and terrified. It was probably the closest Daddy ever came to having a heart attack. Randall thought the joke was hilarious. How patient Mama must have been. She watched us so closely that there was not much opportunity for disobedience while she was around. Though while she was away, we always seemed to find some mischief to get into. She tried to teach us to do right, even when we were on our own. She had a way of correcting us without lectures or nagging. She would often quote rhymes to us that had a pertinent message in them. The one that stands out the most and probably had the greatest impact on me was the grasshopper story, which I read earlier. So many times I heard her quote it. Leaving us home occasionally was not just a convenience, because teaching us to be self-reliant, it was necessary for other reasons. The amount of food and supplies it required for all of us for a month often took up the entire car. If she had taken all of us with her, there would have been no room for the food. Mama usually took one of us with her on her grocery shopping excursion as a helper, or perhaps to spend a day alone with us. It was a rare treat to have her all to ourselves for a whole day. Even as energetic as we were, shopping was a pretty tiring affair. First, on Tuesday, when the grocery ads arrived with the newspaper, the ads had to be searched for bargains. There was a supplement to the newspaper called the Fresno Guide that was delivered to every household whether they took the paper or not. The newsprint paper was green, and it contained the classified ads. The colorful grocery ads were also included in the bundle, and Mama would look through all the different ads and circle the best price in red crayon or ink, and then compare them with the other store's ads until she found the one with the lowest prices. Then coupons were cut and sorted. Armed with these, we headed for the grocery stores on the day the welfare check came in. We shopped at every one, buying only the items that were on sale in each store. It was often frustrating because the stores would put items on sale, but they limited the number of items that could be purchased at that sale price. She would usually buy the maximum that was allowed according to her budget. When you are trying to buy enough food to feed a small army of children, it's hard to make the money go far enough. Some things had to be purchased in the largest quantities available. Onions were purchased in 50-pound net bags, and potatoes in 100-pound burlap sacks. Flour was bought in 20-pound floral fabric sacks, sugar in 10-pound paper bags. Pinto beans were our staple and were also purchased in 50-pound burlap bags. Day-old bread was purchased from the Hostess bread store in large cardboard barrels. The barrels often contained chocolate cupcakes, snowballs, and Twinkies or fruit pies. Sometimes the bread was already moldy, so we got the whole barrel for $1. The moldy bread we fed to the pigs. If the bread was stale but not moldy, we would put it in the oven, still wrapped in the cellophane wrapper, and heat it up. The crust would become crisp, but the inside would be amazingly soft and light. It was delicious if eaten hot out of the oven with melted margarine on it. Anytime Mama was able to get food items in large quantities, she did. We also went to the salvage store on Belmont Avenue, a market that sold damaged goods, where we bought boxes and boxes of breakfast cereal at half price. Usually the boxes might be damaged, but the food was still good. Sometimes we would get crackers or pasta. Each time I went to the salvage store, I longed for one of the boxed dolls that were arranged around the top of the shelves. The doll came with a complete wardrobe. I had never seen something I desired more. They were only $10, but were far beyond our reach, and not only because they were on the top shelf. Usually, though, we bought pasta from the spaghetti factory. We could buy broken ends and pieces in a long box. Going to the spaghetti factory was fascinating because they had racks of spaghetti drying. The strands of spaghetti hanging over the wooden dryer rods were about 4 feet long. After they were dry, they were cut into smaller lengths and packaged. The round ends and broken pieces were what we bought. It was still good pasta, just not perfect. We drove to the vegetable stand to get fresh fruit and vegetables by the lug-size box. On and on it went, until by evening we were on our way home with the car weighted down and loaded to the hilt, looking just like we felt. We were two weary, worn, and exhausted shoppers. We were literally the epitome of shop till you drop. There was barely room in the car for all the food for a month, let alone for any extra passengers. The other children had to be left at home. Shopping was not confined to groceries alone. When you have children, they have to be clothed, and that was another great challenge.